So Ashfaque, I'd like to start with you. So can you share a little bit about this whole process, even after your film, the Q&A, you know, we cleared up this thing of, you know, Tamil Muslim, Tamil Christian, Tamil Hindu, and the fact that there is, when it comes to Elam, somehow certain Tamil communities are left out of the Elam package, right? So can you just share a little bit about the Muslim community, Tamil Muslim community, and post the Civil War, and because that is the background, the context in which you made this film. So can you just talk about why you decided to, what was that historical point that you wanted to begin with? Yeah.
So, I born from a very conservative Muslim family. Filmmaking, or you know, it's not a thing. So I want to be a rebellious Muslim, you know. And I don't want to call myself as a Muslim person because, you know, I want to be this rebel, you know, young filmmaker. So I came to Colombo. I fought with my family, and completely different world to me in Colombo. So I'm from the east part of Sri Lanka. So I was working with this film with Sumati, which is about the expulsion in the north, Muslim expulsion. So in that film, there is a art property, which is a statue, Mary statue, that I had to bring from Manna, which is in the north, right, to Colombo. This is just after the Easter Sunday bombing. So for me, it's nothing, but just after the Easter Sunday bombing, a Muslim person with a Muslim identity card carrying a Mary statue from Manna to Colombo is not, you know, that's the moment where I felt like, you know, oh, this is not a simple thing, and it's scary. You know, the army can stop you and arrest you. That's the starting point to understand what really happened in Sri Lanka. So I went on research, looking for answers. That's when I got to know, so in the northern province, the fight for Ilam is for Tamil Hindus, not Tamil Muslims. In the early days, there were Muslims, like I said before, Muslims, warriors who joined LTT. Even one of my uncles, my father's brother, who joined LTT, who like later died. They also, you know, won the Tamil Elam because, you know, the Sinhala majoritarian power were trying to rule us. But later, you know, LTT, they felt like Muslim Tamils are not their issue. They are like completely different. So I want to capture that point, and in the Sri Lankan war context, if you talk to anybody, it's Tamil Sinhalese war and not Tamil Muslim, because even the Tamils who want a Tamil Elam and, you know, a separate state, they don't want the Muslims to include in their state. So I want to bring that aspect to it. So when I you know, searched about the Ashifa's character, I can't talk about Ashifa without tell the story of war. Because in Kathankudi, surrounded by Tamil dominant village. So after the war, all the Muslims living in Tamil dominant area, they had to move to Kathankudi. That's why the Kathankudi is town. You see date trees in Kathankudi, which is later like brought from Saudi and planted in Kathankudi just to, you know, establish that it's a Muslims area. And in Sri Lanka, we call Kathankudi mini Dubai because, you know, they clear that Kathankudi is for Muslims. So in my film, the Palmyra tree and date tree, the journey from Palmyra tree to date tree is the journey what war made, you know. That's why you see a lot of Palmyra tree walking this, you know. So yeah, I think I answered.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The other challenge, I think, in your film is that you're navigating something very complicated. Firstly, your own identity as a Muslim, young Muslim filmmaker. Plus, you are talking about really issues related to Muslim women. Okay, that's another whole area. And given that your research material, women would give to you on audio but did not want to be filmed, so you had to come up with a formal strategy. So the thing of never seeing her, we only see her back, or she's always has her burqa on. So that's another kind of peculiar challenge that you had to make to bring it into the film. So I think these strategies of yours for me also are very interesting. I think that because, and the personal risk also of being in that space and talking about these complexities, right? Because whenever we break the regular narrative, right? It's always a risky thing. People are used to one narrative. And when you start critiquing from within, for example, what is happening with all the Jamaats and their attitude towards women, etc., there will be consequences for you at some point when the film is shown there. So could you talk a little bit about that, and then we have to move on. The other thing I felt which was so interesting also is that the way you dealt with the love story, you know, using clips. Have you, the audience, have many of you seen his film? So the love story has all these scenes from Tamil films, which are hyper romantic, and you just cut to a sequence like that. So I think there are a lot of like very creative solutions that you tried to put in, you know, because of the challenges of making this film, given where you are.
So when I was studying film, I read somewhere it's camera lensa men's eye. So, like men's eye. So that struck me. Even if you see a rape scene in a film, the camera was placed to the women. You know, they were like, there's no angle change. So these things are like in my mind. So I want to change it differently. So that's the main thing in my head when I'm trying to make the film. So I always go for wide shots and just let the cameraman say, okay, this is not me looking at it, this is not anybody's looking at it, this is something happening, we're just watching it. That's the type of framings I wanted to be. And yeah. So Ashfaque's story, she doesn't want to be like, you know, shown in the film. But again, I want Ashfaque's story to be there. So I asked this university student to like act in the film. Then I thought, okay, if she acts in the film, that becomes a fiction film. And it's a reenacting the scene. So then I thought, let's document this university student, how she feels about Ashfaque, just, you know, playing her role. So that then it will be a different, you know, eye. So that's how I started, you know, seeing the film, and yeah.
No, I thought actually that moment when finally you see the actress Ashfaque, who then is without the niqab, without the veil, and that's a great, I think, fourth wall kind of way of breaking that narrative. So, yeah, so I congratulate you on all these aspects.
Okay, so quickly, very quickly. So she feels, the real Ashfaque feels her boyfriend is a hero. So, yeah, hero. So, and she's a fan of this actor Vijay Devarkonda. So I want to make it a Hollywood drama, like Hollywood drama kind of love story to serve, and yeah, that's all.
We all have to be fangirls and, you know, do the fangirl thing. So, no, I thought it was very clever actually. And she has the ringtone, and so she's a real fangirl. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. We come back, but we have other people on the panel. So, Priyanka, okay. Yeah, Priyanka. So, you know, I mean, I think there was, I mean, after your film, I think there were a lot of very interesting points that you made, which came up, and one of the things that really struck me, which was actually remarkable, was the idea that you did not want to go into the typical partition narrative, which is that of the violence and the horror and the retelling of kind of atrocities, if you'd like, right? But you chose to do it in the realm of something which is very Kafkaesque, you know, which is the office. in terms of these documents, and in these documents is really all the stories, but you chose to go that way, right? And I found that actually a very fascinating thing. So could you speak a bit about the use of text, also animation, which was very remarkable, and also I love the idea of the blank forms and you're filling in the forms with your data in an animated way. So there were lots of very things that really shook you, you know, a very interesting use of text. Also to use text as image, which was also very interesting. So would you like to share something about that?
Yeah, thanks Deepa for that articulation. I think since I've been working on the book and this project, I'm still literally quite in the thick of it, in the thick of all the documents and the text and everything. And one thing that that struck me and that I still feel is that, you know, it's seen, because also the violence is seen as this sort of, you know, moment of madness that struck upon people and they just did this thing. And I don't think we should see it as just that, because then what also happens is that we forget that there was a whole social sort of system that was in place, which was stratified in a certain way, that there were, of course, there was a lot more tolerance, but intermixing wasn't there in the way that we imagine when we look at United Punjab or undivided Punjab with the lens of nostalgia. We think, you know, so when I found out about how there was, you know, Hindu water and Muslim water on railway stations, I was like, oh, okay. So this idea of something being structured, of this decision making being structured in a certain way, and actually structure doesn't really mean thought out, because I was also now with the book where I'm developing these fictional narratives. I wanted to do these sort of set of dialogues which are happening, which we have sort of written between the members of the Boundary Commission of Punjab with Charandas Bangia, and the line has just been drawn. And if you read the report of the Boundary Commission, the Radcliffe Award or whatever it's called, that report one copy is there in the Amritsar Partition Museum. It just makes no sense after a point, because the text reads as the line moves left and then it goes to this village, then the line moves right, the line will go here, the line will end here. That's the actual border. And there's this moving line, which this person who doesn't know the place, and so you sort of, I don't know, you're zooming in, zoom out or whatever. So there, in this abstract scene, that whole, you know, line is moving, and then there's all this that's happening in real, you know, to people, which is then carrying on after generations. So this idea of that moment of madness doesn't quite fly with me. And there's also another sort of book that I recently came across, which is called The Last Darbar. It's taking off from conversations which are sort of happening in the run-up to the announcement of the partition. And there's also another film by Ken McMullen called The Partition, where you just see the absurdity of officially what is taking place. You know, there is this conversation about how are we dividing this and how are we dividing that, and then there are dinners, and then, you know, there's all this question about we have to get back, but oh, these guys are going to be left fighting, and all of that. And then if you are coming from a family which has, you know, experienced it, the whole thing is sounding very different to you. So with the film, I also wanted to sort of make it a space where, a polyphonic space where there are many voices that are also placed in a way that I can sort of displace this context that we have been sort of fed in this official sort of narrative. That 15th we got independence, now 14th is this whatever day of horrors that they started calling, and after that we were well on our way to being this great nation. And so that was the idea, to sort of bring in literary voices where, like we were discussing yesterday, there is a lot more sort of exploration of the complexity in literature. so I wanted to sort of pick up on that, and then I, of course, was, and all of the material that you see in the film is actually open source. It's all available on the internet, like the Constituent Assembly debates. The letters that Jawaharlal Nehru wrote are all, the PDF is available, which is, you know, from his collected letters that he was writing. And there's a lot of letters that he's written during that time, visiting Punjab or about referring whatever is happening in Punjab. So all of that is available online, and I felt that that it needed to come in to kind of also bring out that it wasn't as straightforward as, okay, you know, now you take this country and this is ours. It was much more complicated than that. And then this entire process of rebuilding, then there were these laws, and then some of the ministry was then dissolved, then the custodian of evacuee, new institutions that were created here and there, and this constant calculation of property, because this whole thing was that the amount of property that Hindus and Sikhs had left behind is not the same, is a little bit less than what the Muslims left behind when they leave. So how do we compensate for that now? So yeah, so that was all that information that was coming at me, and I wanted to give it space within that narrative, and then kind of create that sort of landscape. And the use of animation was also that, you know, when I was looking at these documents, I was literally, like yesterday I was saying, imagining these to be populated with stories and characters. So the idea was to just lay it onto it and see, like this whole, that little conversation that I put on one of the allotment orders is this bit that I had taken, excerpt I have taken from that Out of Ashes, which is a very detailed sort of telling of the rehabilitation process in rural Punjab, only in rural Punjab. So, and there was all this terminology, standard acres, and how they calculated who will get what, how should the villages, because the idea was that people from the same village should be rehabilitated in the same area, so that the community is retained after doing after all of this happens. So anyway, that little bit conversation is happening about how there is a little meeting, and and you know, they can choose like whatever house they are going to be allotted, and one person already has a house in the field, so that you can't have two houses, and that's against the rules. So this against the rules really became, you know, something that I was trying to wrap my head around, that you're doing this and then you're creating rules. So that's also what the state does, that they invent these categories, like there was this category of doubtful citizen which was created at that time for a lot of Muslims who happen to be on the other side of the border and their families are here. So if they come back, then are they still going to be here, or do they want to leave? And so it's like you have to prove loyalty to the nation. And sorry, I just lost my thread. But basically, yeah, there was all of this going on. And yeah, so one of this dialogue scenario in the book, I've titled it as Anarchy as per the rules. So then that's that kind of Kafkaesque thing where, yeah, I felt that, you know, we need to maybe just displace it onto like who is going to, how does this structure operate and where is it coming from? It's not just people's madness, just like, yeah.
You know, it's very risky to make a film based on 80% text. Okay? And I congratulate you for that, because, you know, text is text, right? And film is always visual, no? You're supposed to think in terms of images in a particular way. But I think the way you have treated text, whether it's original documents with animation on top of that, whether the way the titling is done, it's extraordinary. I mean, you know, you just feel really the voices, you spoke about polyphonic voices, the voices just actually leap off the page. And I thought that was really extraordinarily well done, the whole thing. The other thing, of course, that struck me was, you know, how the film also speaks, because there's personal history and there's official histories, not one, many, right? And to bring the two together in your edit is really extraordinary. I mean, I think that's really, was that hard? Was that difficult to how to manage that material in that way?
Yeah, the edit for this, all edits are difficult because I also edit films otherwise, but this one was particularly difficult because, you know, one wasn't following a character arc, one wasn't following a narrative arc in that sense. So yesterday as I was watching it, I was like, wow, it really goes to different places, like you can't tell. So one of the ways of dealing with that difficulty was to develop scenarios. So I remember I had developed different threads of home, property, city, and document. So one of the ways was to be super organized with material that is actually extremely fragmented. And then from that, finding sort of threads and overlaps and making also intuitive connections. And then in terms of text, there were different registers on which it was operating. So there's of course the personal archive and that register of you know, something that his life is tethered to. Then there is the text which is the voice of the state, spoken in the voices of officials. Then there is the text which is literary and of imagination. So in just tuning into those different registers and trying to see how they can speak to each other. And one of the things that I did, for example, was to make that alphabet, which I thought was something that was happening because I was reading a lot of material around the literature. When I went to the index, I realized there's something very similar that's going on in all the books. So then I thought, okay, what will it look like if we compile A for this, and M for this, that kind of thing that. So then it's like you have this visual mapping of what the partition language is or has been. And maybe that comes from my training at NIT, maybe, of studying film matter design school. It could be, because there, you know, you are really invested in process and mind mapping and sort of trying to look at very complex systems and how things connect and stuff. So somewhere I think over there in that time I got really invested in this language of how are we speaking about it? What are we saying? What are the words that we are using? And are they close to describing experiences? And since for me it's very clear that it's an intergenerational conversation. It's in no way possible for, I don't feel about it in the same way as my grandparents have. And they actually, different to what Bani was saying, they never spoke about it. There was no conversation. So one was of course a thing of curiosity. There was also a lot of ignorance. Like when I made my first film, I was still asking some of my grandmother's friends, so were you guys watching films? And they were in Karachi, and they said Karachi was an amazing city and we were going to the theaters. What are you talking about? So I was like, oh, maybe 47 is not that far back, you know. So it is an intergenerational conversation where what I'm also looking at is then what am I responding to when I'm looking at all of this, and how does it relate to us now? And that's a question that I don't know. So I think it would be nice.
So I think it's a very good segue from what she said. That so how do we deal with the present moment, right? Even though one is talking about the past in a way, or you're talking about traumas that are held in a family, or you know, that are still painful. But and especially because you were 6 when you left, and and in the film there's always this conversation about the instability of memory, right? Which I found very interesting. So in that sense, and your own sense of that not being home and then finding a home, or feeling that you're at home, let me put it like that. So So how would you speak about your journey in that? And before that, I also want to say that for both of you, I felt very importantly for you and for Ashfaque, is that somehow, you know, your identity becomes the primal thing. Okay? It's like, okay, so as a Kashmiri Pandit, as a Sri Lankan Muslim, sometimes that identity itself is the only thing people see, right? And they don't see, and somehow you're held responsible for all things relating to Kashmir. I don't know, I'm asking you many things, but if you could.
If you are from a community, religion, anything, obviously there are people who have preconceived ideas about your set of beliefs. They decide for you. This person will obviously have this kind of a narrative or this kind of a tone. So I have always lived with that and tried very hard to break that with this film, because and I have always been questioned, oh, when the film is going to was starting, I thought it was going to go in something else like this. So I said, yeah, but you have to not, you have to not decide for me and just hear my story and just give it that chance. So all of us have biases, but then what's the point? So yeah, somewhere I tried to really go against all of that to make that film, make my film. And yeah, about the process and the memory thing, I was 6, and a lot of kids at 6 do have memories, but I just did not. My earliest memory is of our house our makeshift house in Jammu where we first came, and I absolutely had very faint memories. So I always grew up on everyone else's memories. And so because I did not have any memories of my own, I grew up listening to everyone else's, like, how our grandparents speak about their ancestral homes. And I always wanted to make my own memories, have something that I can own and I can talk about it. But I didn't have that. So I think that is where the journey began, in the sense that, yeah, this is all beautiful, this is your shared experiences, and this is how you grew up, but this is not what I grew up with. So I think that's what pushed me to, convince my family to take that first trip to Kashmir after 24 years of them leaving. It took like about 6 months of just convincing them to, let's just go and we'll just have a good time. We'll just do all the touristy things and come back. And from that trip onwards, like in the film I said, when I landed there, I heard everyone talking in this language where I had only heard in the 4 walls of my home, nowhere else. And then I was like, this is where I belong, but this is what I was, my childhood should have been here. And I felt so comfortable, because I was like, ye to apni jagah hai, these are my own people. And I think that had never happened to me before. I grew up in a city. I was not really I was not looking at where I came from and, oh, why am I just didn't question it. I was just living my own life. But yeah, that trip changed a lot of things for me, and I went on this journey to really find out where do I belong and what is home, and where do I feel at home, and it's always there.
So the other question I have, actually, both your films, Bani, yours, and yours, Madhulika, because there's such intense personal stories where you are yourself, you're in your films, both of you, you're very much, you're, for example, the guide who takes us through the story. And on camera, we also see your emotional journey. It's not as if you're not doing reporter style. You're doing it, your things happen. And so what was that process like? Because I know that, it's all very well to talk about oral histories. I can't even get my friends to sit still to have a conversation about their, what I mean, the whole thing. The camera does something, the camera in a space alters the space. And And there must be a lot of negotiations with family. Because of course in the edit it's all cleaned up and, you know, we don't see any of that. But can you share something about the challenges or the joy also? It needn't be challenges, just joy of filming family and...
Yeah. I have to say, all the old, like including my own mother, they just said no. They didn't want to be interviewed. But I told my mother, at least you I need to keep. So I put the camera and I made her sit on a sofa. And she just went blank. She didn't say a word. So I'm like, what do I do? I said, just say anything. So she didn't say anything. So then I said, there's no point. So actually the camera was on and, you know, my DP just left the room when you see her with the editor, with Khushbu. And she didn't know the camera was on. That's why she's chilling and talking with her legs up on the chair. And, you know, she had no idea. And then later I showed her, I said, if I would have told you, would have not opened up. So I think a lot of my aunts, uncles just didn't agree. And then even if they did, they were just saying something. They were so careful of what they were going to say on camera. So I said, you are not giving an interview to the news reporter. Just be honest. But yeah, it was very difficult. But I also made the film over 4 years, so gradually, you know, yeah, with my sister. And no, I didn't keep a lot of old people. I stuck to, and all my cousins who were my sister's age, and mostly the men, they had just so much angst and they just wanted to, I think they thought that the camera is something where they could just, I'm not saying they were wrong or anything, but I chose to not keep any of that in the film.
So yeah, so that did strike me that it's mainly the women in your family who are in the film.
Because they were saying the most interesting things, like my mother's talking about bartan, you know, her utensils she left behind and the clothes, and because these were small things that mattered to them. They were not talking about the politics and what was happening. We've heard that, we know that, we understand. But for women it was just so different because they were only talking about the saris and, you know, the little things I had collected over the years which they left behind. And I realized all of that meant so much to that, and we never spoke about them. Nobody interviewed them ever, I think. So I was very careful that I'm going to just keep them because, you know, they're going to be the most honest with their thoughts and feelings and what they went through. So yeah.
No, I'm asking about when you screen the film, and some spaces are welcoming, some I wonder if they're hostile, because I think like you're really brave to have made this film, because I think the whole Kashmiri Pandit story and all of that is, you're already sort of entering into the lion's den, you know, when you look at the kind of narrative that exists, which is so fixed and rigid, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, what kind of audience responses?
I've had actually, usually when the film is over, and I've had mostly people coming, and I think they get what I'm trying to say with the film. It's not about, I mean, the thing is, if you mention Kashmir, it is political. You can't escape it. There's no way. But in this film, I stuck to my search for my home. You know, I was constantly, even on the edit, I was like, oh, it's going somewhere else, but I need to bring it back to my search for the home. And if I don't stick to that, it can go anywhere. So I'm careful of that. But I've had, so yeah, in some screenings, there have been people, like the first thing that you spoke about, where you have a fixed idea of a certain kind of a person because they come from a community. So there have been reactions and questions, and which have nothing to do with the film, but I've been asked, you know, to comment on this, that. But I've just tried to just keep it to the film, and I just request them to just ask me about the film, because I'm no analyst or some specialist here to talk about everything to do with Kashmir, you know. I'm here to tell my story, and that needs to be heard as well.
I think, like, you know, one thing that struck me was the whole thing of oral histories, right? And I feel in a sense that even Priyanka's film and your film, and in a way, it's really a retelling of different histories. It's a way of even revealing, not retelling, revealing certain histories that don't exist, you know. And so I was wondering, you must have a lot of material, right?
Yes.
A lot more material.
Yeah.
And would you be thinking of archiving it maybe somewhere? Because I think it's, because nobody's ever going to do this again. I mean, it's so valuable. I mean, Priyanka, you're bringing out a book which is great, you know, which is another iteration, a more detailed iteration of your research. But would you think of maybe figuring out how to archive it and to make it accessible?
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing I can say is that perhaps my design education helped me in one way, that I, right from the beginning, saw the story in many layers. So there were always many layers intersecting, and it was a journey, and it was also about the fact that, you know, I had not lived through the partition, but I had inherited that legacy now. And that legacy is passing on to my daughter also. So this feeling of the fact that this partition is impacting generations, I wanted that to be a little bit of an experience also. So, you know, it was, I mean, the ordinary life of the filmmaker also, and everything that is around her. And I mean, it could be another filmmaker who's a man also who makes it. So how we are never really separate from the work we do while we are doing it. So I was very keen to bring the back end into the front end, you know. So in a sense, it was very much the process becoming the film. That is something I enjoy, because there's a certain honesty to it. So, you know, the audience is aware of the fact that there is somebody behind the camera. The camera is also another crew member perhaps. So, you know, you at points have me adjusting it, and you see my hand and the wire. So I wanted it to be a very process-oriented film in that sense, so that it always looks like a work in, you know, a work seeking completion. It's not really as if it's, so that was a feeling. I remember I used to say I don't want it to look like an oil painting. I want it to be a sketch, you know, with that kind of freshness, or a watercolor. So that was one thing that I said to myself in the process, and I think I definitely saw this story itself as having three stories. So one is the story of my father and his friendship. The second one, which I actually chose to leave out in the film, is the story of the game itself. So I am currently working on a hockey archive, which is, you know, telling the story of hockey, but in a way that is a socio-cultural history, and we touch the many personalities. So we kind of get a sense of who we are as South Asians. So I've started working on that, and I mean, the most challenging one is the story of my mother, which I haven't really begun, but definitely I see the three of these stories really, if one could get, of course there would be many more, but these three really are structural threads in the larger story for me.
I think it's great that you have that the work has moved, you know, into another space, and I think the hockey archive is it'll be a fantastic thing.
I want to bring this back actually to this discussion about home, belonging and identity, because I think there are a lot of people from my generation and younger, starting from mine, which is like 6 decades old, but everyone coming later from a certain cosmopolitan, city-bred existence, who has less this sense of identity or sense of belonging to even any particular community or language, unless that comes under threat and unless it's whipped up maybe externally. So even I find it very difficult if someone asks me, where are you from? In India, I find it difficult to answer, because I was born in one place, brought up in a different place, studied in a different place, worked in 3 different places, all of which have different languages. So, you know, it's like, where am I actually from? But it's not been a question that's bothered me particularly. I've not had a sense of looking for an identity and so on. But the external environment, which is now pushing a lot of people to make choices about, okay, I'm from here, I am so and so, this is my community, Do you think somewhere this divorced from this, material thing of land and home as in a physical structure? Because I really liked how Priyanka focused this thing about, I didn't leave Lucknow, Lucknow came with me. So what is it about that identity that you take with you everywhere? And do you think that's a good thing? Is it a good thing that we take a bubble everywhere? Is it a good thing that we actually have an identity and don't feel so rootless? Or is feeling rootless itself such a bad thing?
So in northern province, Manna is a place where most Muslims display. So there was this minister who supported the Muslims when they went back to north. So the minister is called as shopping bag minister because when the LTT asked the Muslims to leave, all of them, they just took a shopping bag and put everything inside and just. So because of that, they are known as shopping bag community, shopping bag minister, because he was helped to go back. That's one thing. And the eastern province, it's a different context because these Muslim women particularly went from the Tamil community dominant area. So what they wear, how they what they belong, it's all different. So when they moved back to Kathankudi, moved to Kathankudi, so the most federation in Kathankudi, they asked to, change their style of costume, So two different areas, clothes, because in Tamil area they used to wear sari without niqab and shalwar just without wearing it. So these Kathankudi people have said, no, you can't come to Kathankudi. Though they are Muslims, we have different rules, so you have to change your clothing style. So that, you don't know what belongs to you, So when you go back, sometimes, so recently I've been doing research on the upcountry Tamils in Sri Lanka. So they've been brought to Sri Lanka in 1820, and we have remembered 200 years in Sri Lanka. So in that, we are trying to focus on objects belonging that they brought. So we have this trunk box, the kambli, the blanket, and parai. But now the generation, they don't want to really recall it. They want to move forward, and though they want to, keep their identity, but again, they want to remember their belongings. So all these different, notions of belongings, strikes you.
To think of what I was thinking of when I started sort of working on this idea of the partition, I didn't have, I think I became aware of the difference in what people felt when they said that, we have an ancestral place to go back to, and then you realize that, okay, Delhi is not like that, so it's, or Delhi is not your ancestral place, so then where is it? And that's where the questioning started. But I don't think rootlessness in that sense is a bad thing. I mean, since that was a question. I feel like if I hadn't grown up in Delhi, and if I was growing up in Punjab, for example, my whole life trajectory and access and options would have been completely different. So this kind of, and if one looks at historically and culturally, socially, many really interesting things have come up with, things mixing up and sort of, identities shifting, and I think there's also a fine line between that kind of wanting to remember, to hold on to something, and that kind of narrative is really going on. No, this going back to we are going back to the roots and what that means, and from there we will then define. So what for me is also a question of curiosity is, what is this anxiety of losing this sense of belonging? What is it that is really getting disrupted in the collective self as well? And what, therefore, then should be the function of this remembering? And we were also talking about earlier this thing of, in that Joginder Paul, in that story that he says that people become the land that, he says it very well in Urdu. And I do feel that people then therefore carry their homes and that part inside of them. And when all the work that I've been doing has been focused on that place in the imagination. Because for me it became very clear that the Punjab that they left behind or the homes they left behind don't exist anymore in that way. I mean, obviously they don't. They are part of that virtuality for them and for me. But also that the place that is now Lalpur has moved on and other things have happened, that they've gone on to have their own trajectory, and so also Amritsar. And I don't think anyone there is having these kind of crises. You know, people over there want to move on. I don't think they want to sit and talk about the partition. I tried some conversations, like, no, this is not, you know, aspirations are different and all. So I think this anxiety of wanting to go back to something and fix and all is just something we should probably think more about why.
I just want to say, I think we should change the language, you know, because I think for the thing is that particularly for Hindus, we are fixed in our caste identities. Okay? Whether you like it or not, we are fixed in our caste identities. And I think mediating those caste identities, whether you are in a cosmopolitan city or in a village or wherever you are, you know, you cannot escape it. And if you want to, then you have to really, really battle with this idea that what will be an anti-caste position, for example. You know, what kind of position do you want to take? So it's really, for me, it's not a question that's linked to a physical space, because this thing of Vatan and idea is all linked to property in a way. You know, you have to have property first. I mean, you know, I think my parents never had property till very late in their life. So there was no question of ancestral home, village, or a rural connect or anything like that. But this other identity, which is very much there, which is also in every school certificate, in your college, in your, there is a whole bureaucracy that maintains this official identity for you. And the way you're perceived, of course, the way you're perceived socially. That's another thing, right? So for me, I think that is really the question. And the other thing that goes with identity, which personally I reject, is this kind of ethno-nationalism, you know? Like, which belongs to language and to region, you know, like, are you a proud Kannadiga, are you a Telugu Bidda, are you a Dravidian Tamil, are you a which, you know, it's all related to this very much, this whole regional I call it ethno-nationalism, basically. So what happens to people like us, you know, who I firmly reject all of this stuff, okay? So I think this question of really, you know, I'm quite happy in not really being rooted, because being rooted today for me is very problematic in what you get rooted into. Okay? That's very, very problematic. Sorry, that's my 2 bits.
I think to answer your question, for me, home is a place that I feel safe in and secure to be who I am. I mean, even so, sometimes actually home is now not often with your own community, it could be with your friends, because you know, one moves all the time, one changes all the time. So, I mean, for example, yesterday I came back from Lahore. So in a sense, you know, if one was taking that route and whatever analogy, I was really there at the center. But I was just so happy to be coming back to Bangalore too. And home is here, you know.
I think we sometimes forget to understand the class element in displacement. You know, the class element always matters, in which class you are from. So in my film, she comes from a very low class. So what she has or had is completely different from a Podiyar who's like a landlord from the Tamil dominant area, you know, moving. So we also need to keep in our mind, like, what's the class element play the role in this displacement context. Yeah, that's all.